Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. Saturday Morning Sit Down.
Joining me now is Louis Alexander. Louis is the first and only person in history to complete marathons on all 7 continents and swim marathons in all 7 seas. Over 633 days, he tested his endurance across some of the world's most unforgiving environments and survived, from running through the torrential rains in the Amazon rainforest and braving the freezing temperatures of Antarctica to swimming the scorching heat of the Arabian Sea. Louis, so great to be with you today. Thanks for being with me.
Likewise, thank you for the kind introduction.
The first and most obvious question, Louis, is why? Why did you decide that you were going to be an adventure runner, racer, swimmer, and do all of these things?
Okay, we're starting big. The big question to begin, well, I'm 25 now, as you said, but my adventures go back to when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and the truth is it wasn't on a bigger adventure or bigger challenge somewhere that this all started. It was actually sat at home talking to my mum about my granddad, and I found out at 18 years old that my granddad's dream was to go off and climb Mount Kilimanjaro. He dreamed of climbing it in his retirement, but sadly he'd been diagnosed with dementia in his 50s, so he never had the opportunity. So at 18 years old, I decided to take on that responsibility. I felt this need, this urge that I had to go and climb for him to fulfill his honour, his legacy. And truth is, although I went out there and climbed for him and the charity, Alzheimer's Research UK, I also returned home with something for myself, which was this brand new found passion and purpose for adventure, for travel, for challenge, a purpose to do these things for something bigger than just myself. And everything has all stemmed from that very first challenge, climbing Kilimanjaro at 19.
Louis, as we sit here in the comfort and calm of Singapore at the 1880 Club, in a place that is very different than many of the environments that you have done your extreme adventures, both running, swimming, and climbing, what do you see as really, besides this drive that you had to honor your grandfather and his dementia, where does the personal drive come from for you? By your own admission, you're not an athlete by training. You did sport in school, but you are not like a high-impact athlete. Where does this come from in you to keep doing these really amazing feats?
Well, you're certainly right. The first motivation was obviously my granddad, but the truth is now I have so many motivations. I was fortunate to go full-time at 22 years old. I took that leap to actually turn this hobby into a career, and the truth is now this is almost like a journey of both inspiration and desperation. You know, I'm inspired by these adventures. I truly love them. I love going to these places, pushing myself, challenging myself. I love the business. I know this is a business-focused show, so I love all the behind the scenes of the sponsorship, the PR, the logistics, everything it needs to help these expeditions take off. But the truth is I also now need them. It's a desperation. I've now found my passion and purpose in life, and I now have this fear, truthfully, of losing this journey, losing this career, and really, I guess, losing success before I've even properly found it, because it's really just the beginning.
Louis, your first adventure, as you mentioned, 2019, was Kilimanjaro, doing that in honor of your grandfather. But since then, you've done many other amazing things, 17 marathons in 17 consecutive days across the UK. You've rowed the English Channel. You've summited Mont Blanc and Gran Paradiso in the Alps. You've swum from Europe to Asia in the Helen Sport Swim in Turkey. You've done so many things. What is behind how you decide to do the next thing?
That's probably the one smooth, and I don't dare say easy, but one of the easier parts of the whole journey is choosing the challenge, right? Because the first and foremost decision is I only do challenges or adventures that I actually truly want to do. Because when things get tough and things go wrong, right, things always do on these adventures, like in life, you know, whether it's running through a rainstorm in the Amazon or the polar conditions of Antarctica, right? These places are tough places to take on these expeditions. When those moments happen, you have to truly say, why am I here? And if your answer is not, well, I chose to be here. For me, if you're answering because you're doing it for sponsorship or you're doing it to impress someone or for social media, you know, that is not a real and true answer. That's an external motivation. We need internal motivations to truly get through these tough times. So for me, it's about looking at that and thinking about that quite deeply.
But motivation for not being a regular kind of competitive sport person, you really have to find that from a different place than many sports people do. They want to win. They want to beat their competition. They want to do that sort of thing. Is that in there for you, or does it come from a more personal place?
I mean, the truth is, first and foremost, now I think about the adventures, the Guinness World Records, the commercial opportunities. Of course, those are incredible. Those are career-defining. Sometimes they're life-changing too. But first and foremost, no, I go to places I truly want to explore. I take on the adventures I truly want to do for me, first and foremost, because I think that's the true spirit of adventure. That's the true sense of exploration, whatever we might call it. I know these are strange words in today's modern world of modern adventure. But no, first and foremost, I look at the adventures, and I hope everything else will follow. We're
in conversation with Louis Alexander, the first person in history to complete marathons on all 7 continents and swim marathons in all 7 seas. Additionally, when you were running, you ran the 7 Continents project across the Qinqpei Desert, the Wadi Rum Desert in Alaska, Australian outback, Amazon rainforest, the Arctic Circle, and Antarctica. What was that like for you to accomplish so many different marathons in such drastically different conditions?
I think that's the perfect word to explain the whole project, which is contrast. I started in the Qinqpei Desert, Northern Africa. It was 40 degrees, hot, humid. I got chased by a pack of wild dogs. And I finished the project out in Antarctica, where it was minus 25 degrees, polar conditions, the coldest, windiest and driest continent on Earth. It was just the pure and only way to explain that project was contrasts in the weather, the wildlife, the people, the communities, the challenges in everything.
Likewise, swimming the 7 seas was quite an unusual feat. It was across the Red Sea, the Aegean, the Adriatic, the Black, Mediterranean, and North Seas. 10-kilometer swims in each of those. Take us back to what that was like for you. You started, I believe, in the Arabian Sea. Is that correct?
I started out in the Red and Arabian Seas with the first 2 swims, incredibly hot, humid again. I remember the Arabian Sea was actually 31.4 degrees temperature in the sea. It was like swimming in a hot bath almost, which is brutal, right, in terms of fatigue and dehydration. It was really, really challenging. And then finished back home in the UK in the North Sea 7 weeks later I think it was about 15 or 16 degrees, so totally different, very challenging again. And we had everything from swimming through jellyfish fields in the Black Sea. The first 2 swims were so hot actually that some of the GPS devices failed and we had to start again. So many different challenges behind the scenes that most will never see, but it's I suppose in a weird way why we love what we do.
Louis, one of the interesting points that I've come to learn about you is just the relatively humble background that you come from. Your parents are not wealthy. You're an only child. They have supported you through these journeys over the years. It wasn't until fairly far, a couple of years in, that you had major sponsors to help defray costs and things like that. What was the journey like as an amateur to try to do these things when most people would say, you know what, I'm just going to wait until I get some money rolling in from sponsors to make this happen? How did that look for you and your family?
My parents were truthfully the best parents I could have asked for. And in those early years, from finding the hobby from 19 to 22, I worked part-time jobs. I was trying to work out my life. And when I did decide to go full-time at 22, I did everything that probably a young entrepreneur and businessman are told not to do by business managers and accountants. I took out credit cards, I took out bank loans. I truly believe no one will invest in you unless you invest in yourself first. So I had the most amazing parents who said, you can stay at home and we're going to truly believe in supporting you. That's worth far more than any money, right, or family sponsorship. And instead I went off, took risks, believed in myself, and I was so lucky on that first challenge. I met a sponsor who then supported me for 3 years. They ended up paying me a salary and I did talks for their clients, and it was an amazing journey. But it's a scary thing, right? Anyone starting a new business or a new journey, I'm sure so many of your listeners will resonate. You sometimes have to take the risks that everyone advises you not to do, but sometimes when you believe in yourself and you believe in what you're doing, it doesn't actually feel that risky either. I'm not sure if you can resonate with that.
I would imagine a lot of our listeners can resonate with that. Louis, there were some moments early on in your life. You had a wonderful story when you were just 10 or 11 years old, 12 years old, of you and your father going out for a walk with the dog, and him sort of letting you make up your own mind about completing a task. Give us that story briefly, because it seems from what you've told me previously that this was an important moment in your life.
Something I've been asked a lot about recently. I was lucky, I spoke to over 1,500 kids yesterday. We've done a great talk at 1880 this morning, and a common question I'm getting now is what were your parents like? Were they adventurous? Were they sporty? The truth is they weren't necessarily adventurous. I didn't have an adventurous upbringing or anything like that, but what I did have was parents who believed in me and supported me, and they, well, without being too honest, they made every sacrifice for me to have the childhood I did, to go to good schools and to play all the sports. I wasn't the best at any of them, but I was certainly tried my best. And I remember one of the greatest memories of my dad. We used to live nearby a golf course, and he would sneak in at night over the fence to walk the dog, and sometimes I'd take a football with me. And I remember I would say to my dad, this is like at 10 or 11 years old, right? Dad, today I'm going to do 10 keepy uppies. I'm going to do 20 keepy uppies, 30, whatever it was. And I remember we'd be there sometimes for hours. And I really mean hours. And I remember my dad used to just stand there with his hand in his pockets. Sometimes our dog, at the time, Charlie, he would just fall asleep. We'd be there for so long. And I remember he would just let me make my own decision. He never once said, keep going. He never once said, give up. He just gave me that freedom to make my own decision. And you know what, every time I kept going and I got the 20, the 30, whatever it was, and we walked home, and that was a school night. My mum might be mad because I've missed homework, whatever it was, but I really do look back at some of the resilience that I've found on my adventures, and I really do credit with those early days that my parents gave me and showed me, not necessarily just told me what to do, but showed me.
When you were doing the 17 marathons in 17 days in the UK, the night after the 9th and starting the day of the 10th, you hit a real physical wall and a physical and mental challenge. And your mom talked you through that. Set the stage for us what that was like.
Sure. Well, I was running at the point, that was my first adventure as a full-time adventure of 17 marathons, 17 consecutive days in honour of the 17 years my granddad lived with dementia. And I remember the first 9 days were as smooth as, a challenge like that could be. There was Storm Ernest at the time, the UK's worst storm in 30 years, but that came and went. And actually I was enjoying the project. I had hundreds of members of the public come and join me for a mile or for a full marathon. And then I remember on day 10 just waking up, and just like that, everything changed. I woke up with shin splints, a chest infection, and a fever. And I remember, I woke up in shivers, in pain. And my mum, bless her, my mum, chief support crew, she knocked on the door. And I remember she came into my room and she saw me in this state. And she said very clearly, son, do you want to run today? And I said, no. She said, do you want to quit? And I said, no. She said, well, you better get out there and, try and start running. I remember rolling out of bed, putting on my running shoes, and that first 5 kilometers on day 10 took 3 hours. I mean, you've run marathons, Glenn. You know that 5 kilometers, that's 3 hours. That's like slower than a walking pace, right? And the truth is I could barely walk. And I remember my dad phoning all the local physios and doctors saying, please help our son, work with him. And they all refused to. They said, we won't work with him until he stops running. And, naively as a young adventurer, I said, I don't want them to work with me if they don't know how important this is. And that day took 10 hours, I think day 11, 9 hours, and slowly it got a bit better. I got a bit of help from a friend who was a medic in the army. She taught me some techniques of using these ice packs and things. And somehow on day 17, I sprinted over the finish line back home in London, surrounded by family and friends. But my proudest achievement of that whole journey and that challenge is not day 17 crossing the finish line. It's, as you can imagine, it's day 10 deciding to get out of bed and making that decision to keep going. But as you said, I credit my mum totally and entirely, because she never told me to quit. She never told me to keep going. She just said, better get out there and try and, make your own decision. And I remember a few weeks after finishing the challenge, she said that day on day 10 was the most painful moment of her life. But she knew, watching her son head out on his 10th consecutive marathon with shin splints and, I literally looked like death. She said she knew the pain of failing and quitting this journey in honour of my granddad, quitting my first full-time adventure. She said she knew that pain would be worse than running on shin splints. So credit to her. I really owe everything to the people around me.
We see in Singapore, most families encourage their kids to be doctors and lawyers and something, in quotes, respectable. But we do have a number of athletes. Joseph Schooling is one of them. Danelle Tan is another, swimmer and football player, respectively, whose parents and families have really sacrificed everything to make sure their kids had professional careers in sport. Talk a little bit about that impact of having your parents behind you, support you in doing whatever it is they can do to make sure that you realize your dream or your passion.
Well, we all need a support system in life, right? We can't achieve anything alone. I certainly couldn't have achieved any of these adventures, these world records, whatever they might be, without people around me. And the truth is, in those early days, no one really knew what I was doing or even cared about what I was doing, apart from my parents and, a handful of close friends. So having a support system like my mum and dad, who first of all truly did believe in these adventures and the longevity of them. And, when I made that decision at 22 to go full-time, I imagine so many parents and, as you said, support systems might have advised to go down a more stable, a more sustainable, potentially a more respectful career, whatever it may be. But my parents, gave me that strength and that courage to take the leap and take that risk. And without them, maybe I wouldn't have had that strength to do it. And I'm so lucky to have them. And, one of my greatest dreams in life is to be able to look after and retire them in the next, hopefully, few years. And I think that's far more, they deserve far more, but they're always going to be a part of my journey, and I really do owe it all to them.
In the past year or so, in addition to swimming the 7 seas, doing that in 2024, but you've also had a number of accolades. The Adventurer of the Month for National Geographic Traveler magazine, received a personal letter from the Prime Minister of the UK with a commitment to raise figures for dementia diagnosis. You've raised over £50,000 for charity, delivered talks around the world, been a guest at number 10 Downing Street, received your two Guinness world records, etc. Some of these things have taken you away from training and away from doing the actual adventures themselves, but clearly moments well deserved. How have you felt about some of these opportunities? You're in the middle of a big tour right now talking about your experiences.
Well, I mean, my dream when this all started was to share the story, right? I think in some weird sense, doing the adventures is the easy part. The opportunity in developing the actual ability to go on and share the stories is kind of what makes real adventure worth it, right? Adventure is nothing if you just keep these stories and these lessons to yourself, right? You've got to share them with the world, and in whatever way that might be. Some of my heroes, Bear Grylls, Ben Fogle, they share it with books and television. I dream of those platforms one day, but I think we've got to earn them. But I mean, the privilege to share my story. I've delivered talks to over 15,000 kids at the moment, school students back home in the UK, and now getting to start to do that around the world. Visiting Dover Court yesterday. It's a huge privilege and a responsibility I take great pride in, but it is important, like you said, to focus actually on the adventures, because the truth is, at the core of it, no one's interested in any of these records or press or whatever it is unless you finish the adventures and you have success on the challenges. So I always remember that is at the core and the most important thing.
Two of our regular listeners on the show, Lincoln, who is in Chicago, and Rob, who is here in Singapore, had sent me some questions in advance of our time today. And let's jump in on a few of the questions that Rob had first. How do you do all of these adventures without literally, breaking your physical body? You mentioned you did have challenges in that 17 marathons in 17 days. And also from Rob, is there something genetic in your family or something that's gotten you through this? And what's still left on your bucket list?
I think to answer the first question, I think the goal with my training has changed over the last few years. It's not to be the fastest or the fittest or the strongest. It's just to be as injury resistant as possible. So I'm not doing always the glamorous training. I average about 20 hours a week back home. That's 10 hours of training and about 10 hours of recovery. So I go somewhere in London called the Body Lab. They've got hyperbaric oxygen chambers, red light therapy, cryotherapy. I spend a lot of time doing that. It's just, almost resilience building for the body. I also am very aware that youth and, my age does help a lot with recovering and be able to bounce between challenges. Certainly helps. It's not hide away from that. I don't think I'm not sure if it might be something genetic. I'm not sure about that, can't comment. And what's next, the North Star, my dream is just to continue building this career, this journey, and hopefully chase a lifetime of adventures, whether that's mountains or marathons, hopefully one day books and other opportunities. I just want to keep it going. That's my ultimate dream.
How about the best ones so far? The best run, the best swim, the best climb out of all of them that you've done just in a very few short years?
Favorite runs quickly: the Amazon rainforest, incredible, ran on the indigenous land of the Quechua community. Antarctica, one of the most majestic places in the world. I also love the Arctic. We ran through the fjords of northern Norway. The swims, there's much more tougher swims than necessarily enjoyable swims, but the Red Arabian Seas were amazing. We finished in the Aegean Sea below the Temple of Poseidon out in Greece, so that was quite a monumental, or felt like a monumental moment for me. And the mountains, the Mount Kilimanjaro, that first challenge at 19 will probably always be my favorite.
From Lincoln in Chicago, what shoes do you wear? And what do you eat and drink while you're running and or swimming?
Great question. Shoes, I wear Asics. I have done now since the 17 marathon, 17 days. They're just what work best for me from what I've tried. And what do I eat? Well, the truth is I've worked with nutritionists and different people, and the truth is the best answer I've found is everyone is individual and responds differently to different foods. So for me, I have a few staples that I take on my marathons. Those are flapjack, bananas, Haribos, wine gums. Those are sort of what I lean on. A lot of chocolate milk as well, actually, for calories. So during the swimming project, I had to put on a lot of weight to be more buoyant in the water, help with the cold too. And chocolate milk was sort of my savior there. And yeah, those are sort of what's worked best for me. And I think the best thing is just to experiment, try, and practice your nutrition, right? So many of us practice our running, our training, what kit we're going to wear, but we don't always practice our nutrition. So electrolytes, all these different things are great, but make sure you practice with them, because otherwise things can go very, very wrong on race day.
It's not necessarily an ingenious way to end this interview, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't end it this way. Words of encouragement to somebody who's out there, who's got a goal, who's got a project in mind, whether it's physical like you're doing or something in business or whatever. What lesson have you learned in the past 6 years about having a dream, having a goal, and pursuing it to its end?
Just speaking from my experience, I think that the most important thing is just to take that leap, take that risk. I see so many people fail their first marathon because they don't even get to that start line. So take that risk, commit, and when you do commit wholeheartedly. Again, might not be the best business advice, I can't speak on that, but remove those plan Bs, remove those backups. If you have a dream and a plan, you need to go in and go all for it. And then when you are in that moment, you're in it, then ride the wave, right? It's like, these emotions are going to come up, they're going to come down. We can't always control how we're feeling, but what we can control are our decisions, right? Those can be flatline, those can be consistent, and the only decisions sometimes we need to make are to keep going and just simply to never give up. It's cliche, but it's so true. Never give up.
Thanks to Louis Alexander, adventure runner, swimmer, climber, adventure racer, and person who seeks to give honor to his grandfather through all of the various activities. Thanks for being with us today on Money FM.
Thank you, Glenn. Absolute pleasure. And first show in Singapore and Asia too. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.